Hello everybody, welcome. My name is Adam, and today we're going to explore Spec Ops: The Line and fun in video games. Throughout the relatively short lifespan of video games as a medium, a clear theme has become apparent in the motives for actually creating them: entertainment. I think it isn't too sweeping of a statement to say that the majority of video games are both played and created to be entertaining. The main method games seem to employ in order to create an entertaining product for players is through creating an enjoyable experience for the player to immerse themselves in. This enjoyment can be created through a myriad of different factors, for example, a challenge which players can find enjoyment through completing, an engaging narrative in which players find enjoyment through experiencing, or maybe a multiplayer element in which players find enjoyment through interacting with others. Often, games employ all these factors and more in order to create an engaging and entertaining and just plain fun experience. However, is fun the only thing that video games can offer us as a medium? On the broader scale of media and literary mediums, entertainment can come through many different forms. Enjoyment and fun are a large part of this, but we can also be entertained by being frightened by something or being made even to feel upset. If we look at mainstream cinema, for example, different genres are able to entertain us by tapping into the different emotional responses we can give to a piece of work. Now, I am generalising here for the sake of clarity, but in essence, different genres entertain us by being able to dictate our emotional reaction to what we can see on screen. Horror films can make us feel frightened, action films make us feel powerful or incredulous, comedy films tap into our sense of humour, and dramatic films can entertain us by essentially upsetting us. Regardless of opinions on the recent Fault in Our Stars phenomenon, people are lining up to either read a book or watch a film that they know is purposely upsetting in order to be entertaining. Myself and my girlfriend recently watched Grave of the Fireflies, which afterwards she described as a favourite Studio Ghibli film, despite never actually wanting to view it again due to the emotional impact it had. In a film, being merely fun isn't the only way to be entertaining. This is something that, in my opinion, mainstream video games have yet to understand. Now, before I begin, I just want to say that I don't think fun in video games is a bad thing or wrong in any way. It would be massively stupid and hypocritical of me to say so. I do love video games, and I definitely play them in order to have fun or enjoy myself. I understand that they've become a well-loved leisure activity that people of all ages can enjoy. My only issue is that I'd just hate to see this still developing medium never evolve into anything more than just a leisure activity that people play in the spare time, and not actually realise the full potential it has to become a powerful literary medium. One of the reasons I feel this may happen is due to the reservation mainstream gaming seems to have about exploring the different emotional reactions we can give as an audience to a piece of work. In theory, video games have the tools to incite emotions like no other medium can, and this is due to being what is known as an active medium. Other literary platforms, such as books, film, music and art, are known as passive or lean-back mediums, due to the fact that the audience engages with the work through taking on the role of an observer. They have no control over the events unfolding in front of them, instead viewing them from an outsider's perspective. An active or lean-forward medium, like video gaming, is unique in how it gives the audience the opportunity to directly influence the narrative that is being given to them. This is true whether it be a game with a complex story that changes due to the consequences of the player's direct actions, or simply whether or not the character on screen successfully jumps over the pit in front of them. The player directly influences the events that are being presented on screen. This unique feature of video gaming creates an incredibly powerful effect which other mediums struggle to achieve. It allows its audience to become easily immersed within a game, as well as becoming heavily invested in the narrative, as, after all, it's down to the player whether or not and how the plot progresses. When done correctly, this tool can be used to create an incredibly strong emotional tie between player and narrative, one that's much harder to achieve in more passive mediums. It is this opportunity for the creation of a substantial emotional investment within the work itself that I feel is sorely underused and poorly utilised in mainstream gaming. An example of a mainstream video game that uses this powerful ability to great effect is the 2012 third-person shooter Spec Ops: The Line. Developed by Jaeger Development, Spec Ops is no stranger to analysis, with many videos, essays and critiques being published all around the internet, and for good reason. To put it bluntly, Spec Ops is a horrible experience. At no point during its 6 or so hour long campaign could I say I was having fun or enjoying myself. At certain pivotal moments in the plot, I can honestly say that I was genuinely upset. However, this wasn't through the game being poorly made or inherently bad. Quite the opposite. The game was able to achieve such a strong emotional reaction for me because it effectively utilised video games' ability to fully immerse me in the game and the narrative, and influence my emotional reaction to what I was seeing on screen. Spec Ops is able to structure itself so that each element fits together to create a thoroughly entertaining, yet overall unpleasant experience, and it achieves this by employing the many tropes and traditions that we have come to expect from the modern militaristic shooter genre. It then twists them in such a way as to develop a remarkably uncomfortable, yet totally engaging case study on PTSD, the horrors of war, and player-game relationship. Now, there are a number of successful books and films that strive to achieve the same goals as Spec Ops, and to great effect. Saving Private Ryan, one of the most famous war films of all time, spares no expense on painting the devastating results of war and the casualties it brings. Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5 explores a dark surrealist take on PTSD, aided by Vonnegut's own experiences of the Dresden firebombings. However, what Spec Ops is able to achieve that these two great works cannot is through making use of video games as an active medium. Instead of merely showing or explaining its narrative, Spec Ops allows its audience to experience it firsthand by putting the player in charge of the game's protagonist. The player isn't just witnessing the horrific events happening on screen, they're committing them. Spec Ops knows this all too well and plays to it extremely effectively, subtly pacing along the fourth wall, ever so often peeking past to remind you that yes, the atrocities you can see are happening, and yes, they are all your fault. Spec Ops is very much in opposition of the hero fantasy of gaming, the idea that games place the player in a position of great power in order to give them a sense of great gratification by overcoming any challenge the game might throw at them. Spec Ops instead chooses to parody this concept, for reasons I will explain shortly. To give a short, non-spoilery summary of the plot of Spec Ops, you play as Walker, a decorated military captain who is sent to Dubai accompanied by an elite squad after it has been ravaged by a violent storm. You are tasked with searching for a battalion of soldiers who have not been heard from since they entered Dubai in order to help evacuate the thousands still trapped in the city. As time progresses, all is not as it seems, and Walker and his team must fight their way through Dubai in order to find the man in charge of the battalion, Colonel John Conrad. The plot is heavily influenced by the Joseph Conrad novella Heart of Darkness, sharing themes of colonialism and the civilized versus the barbaric. I'm not going to go too into detail with the narrative here, as for people yet to play Spec Ops, spoiling the plot of the game would lessen the effects it would have on their first experience. Instead, I want to talk about the emotional response that is triggered when you take Spec Ops out of a vacuum and view it within the timeline of modern militaristic shooters as a whole. The events that unfold in Spec Ops hit so hard and effectively due to the other games of its kind that surround it. The majority of military shooters can be categorised into the action genre, games which provide entertainment through providing an intense, exhilarating experience involving multiple perils the player must overcome, usually testing the player's reaction time along with the hand-eye coordination. They can range from anything from destroying incoming enemy aliens and space invaders to neutralising Russian ultranationalist terrorists a la Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. For the most part, these games follow an overarching pattern. You are the protagonist fighting for the side of good, and you must overcome the primary antagonist who, for the most part, is inherently evil. This battle between good and evil is what drives the plot, gives you as the player something to fight for, as it's usually insinuated that if you are to fail, evil will prevail and havoc will ensue. In Spec Ops, however, this black and white distinction between good and evil becomes more blurred and ambiguous as the game progresses, until finally you're left wondering who you're really supposed to be fighting at all, or why you're performing the actions you do. It takes the hero fantasy that most of the games base themselves around and flips it on its head, asking if you're really the hero you set out to be, or more acutely, why would you want to be the hero in the first place? These questions are raised more and more aggressively as the game progresses. The protagonist, Walker, seems to become increasingly unhinged throughout the game, beginning with a calm and collected manner that would be expected from a trained military professional, before slowly becoming more irritable and disturbed with each passing travesty he witnesses. He becomes almost barbaric, screaming insults at those he is fighting against, and even seemingly taking pleasure in killing them. This creates a rift between the character and the player controlling them. As Walker's sanity decreases, the more alienated the player becomes from him, until it actually becomes uncomfortable to take on the persona of Walker. This is radically different when comparing the player-character relationship present in other games. Many games choose to leave their protagonist blank, sometimes going as far as to render them completely silent, as to let the player project themselves onto the character and in turn into the game. Think Link, Legend of Zelda, or Gordon Freeman, the Half-Life series. In opposition to this, Spec Ops actively develops its protagonist from one that the player can transmit themselves into to one that the player is jarringly pulled away from, and the feeling is incredibly disorientating. The reason this reversal of tropes has such a grave emotional impact is because Spec Ops disguises itself as a typical militaristic shooter. On first glance, the player can be forgiven in thinking they know exactly what the game will entail. For the first hour or so, Spec Ops paints itself as a more familiar military shooter, employing signposts that mirror those of so many other games that have come previously. The player is given a seemingly morally righteous task and the means to fulfill it. The scene is set, and the player can feel comfortable in the supposed structure that's been laid out in front of them, as it's one they've become accustomed to. And this is exactly what Spec Ops wants you to think. Even the aesthetics of the game are used to divert attention from its true motives, and to great effect. Looking at the box art alone, you'd be forgiven in thinking that Spec Ops shares its structure with most other mainstream shooters. One of the truly impressive feats of Spec Ops is how well it builds itself up to be something it's not, and when it's finally revealed to be something deeper, something much more harrowing than it first appears, the effect is devastating. While the emotional impact of Spec Ops is translated brilliantly through its narrative, it can also be argued that the mechanics of the game itself can help contribute to the constant sense of unease that the game presents, whether it be the developer's intentions or not. This point is a little bit more subjective than others, which is saying something since this entire video is subjective, but I believe it plays a pivotal role in the breaking down of the hero fantasy that so many other games employ. To be blunt, the mechanics of Spec Ops are subpar at best, a point that many reviewers are more than happy to point out. The aiming is sluggish, the tactical squad and SAM mechanics are massively contextual and poorly implemented, explosive barrels are obviously located adjacent to enemy spawn points, the list goes on. However, instead of negatively removing the player from the immersion of the game, these flaws seem almost self-referential. It's almost as if the game is pointing at you through the screen and saying, look, this is a video game, you're playing a video game. Spec Ops wants you to take notice of yourself as you play, to question why you're continuing to subject yourself to the horrors your actions are bringing. It is also parodying the idea of being a hero, or, more importantly, the idea of playing a game in order to feel like one. To quote a line from Spec Ops itself, "You're here because you wanted to feel like something you're not, a hero." This line is said to Walker, but it might as well be said directly to the player. Spec Ops isn't trying to make you feel like a hero, in fact it's trying to belittle you for attempting to be one. This is what the whole game is building up to, and the message it wants to leave you with. The death of the hero fantasy. All of this dressed up in a Call of Duty wrapper and packaged in a Battlefield box is jarring, unnerving, distressing and incredibly engaging. It is a game that isn't about fun. In fact, it seems to be in direct opposition of it. But that doesn't stop it from being massively entertaining, immersive and an all-around fantastic experience. And this is what, in my opinion, mainstream gaming is sorely missing. If we ever want video games to be seen in the public eye as something more than just something we do in our spare time, we need more games like Spec Ops The Line, more games that challenge the way that video games can be entertaining, and more games that explore the many ways which video games can be used as a medium. And there we go, that's it, that's my first video that I spent ages on. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. It's been fun making it. It took me ages, not because it was inherently difficult, just because I'm terrible at doing stuff, but yeah. If you want to see more or have any comments on this video or how crappy my setup is, then please let me know, and if you have any suggestions for topics in the future, I'd love to hear them, and thanks a lot for watching if you made it through this far. I've been Adam, and I'll see you next time.